We're going to be taking a look at Hot Toys DX21, which is of course the Ahsoka Tano and Grogu collectible set. This is a 6-scale figure and is based on her appearance in the Mandalorian Season 2. Figured this was as good of a time as any to take a look at this figure because, number one, she's the most recent figure to join my collection, but also the Ahsoka show has just begun on Disney+. And of course, this is the same Ahsoka, of course, played by Rosario Dawson. So we're going to take a look at the figure, take a look at her accessories, and give some thoughts on the piece overall. Now, before we take a look at the figures, I do want to take a quick look at the box. Now, because this is a DX figure, the packaging is slightly nicer than other typical Hot Toys boxes. The outside here, pretty similar to most Star Wars Hot Toys. I think this is a Lucasfilm kind of mandated thing with the black and the gray and just a simple photo of the product there. That's pretty consistent, not just with Hot Toys, but with Sideshow products and even with Disney's own in-house high-end collectible pieces. They all tend to follow a very similar packaging design. So, but you do have this little cardboard wrapper on that adds a bit more color. Of course, a picture of Ahsoka there, and you do have another photo of Ahsoka and Grogu on the side here. And you can remove that piece if you wanted. But if we take off this slip cover here, now we can see the more interesting part of the box. Now, unlike typical Star Wars boxes where you might just have a top portion that opens here and then you pull out the figure, this is a heavier duty cardboard box. You can see if I spin this around to the side, there is a thicker cardboard with an inserted box in there. But a nice photo of Ahsoka and Grogu here, kind of a sepia tone or maybe orange color, some shiny silver Star Wars at the bottom. The back of the box here, if you want to see what that looks like. Basically the same as the back of the slipcover, same information. It's just some warnings and legal info and all that. And then to get to the inner portion of this, I'm going to try and do this without it kind of coming apart. Bear in mind, I've already pulled out the figure from the packaging, so this is just a look at the box itself. But if I set this aside here, set this back up, you can see we do have a nice panel here, again showing Ahsoka and Grogu, and then there's some little bit of story, little bio real quick there. This comes out, you can see it does have some nice padding on the back side. And then here's where you would have your figures presented. Ahsoka, oh, that just doesn't want to stay in there. Ahsoka and Grogu, just the core figures themselves. If you pull this out away from there, and again, this is a nice foam insert there to protect the figures. And then you've got a more typical plastic clamshell in the back that houses all of the accessories. And then the behind that would be the backdrop that this figure comes with. And we'll take a look at all of that right now. All right, I'm not normally going to go over instruction booklets in these reviews for Hot Toys figures. There's really nothing too interesting in these typically, but I did find one thing kind of strange with this one. As you can see, it is for both DX20 and DX21. DX20 is the version without Grogu. There's also a few accessories that are different in that one, namely the base and the backdrop are different, and that one does not come with the lantern. And what's interesting here is if we flip to the back page, here's where you get to, you know, a couple of specific bits here about the lantern and about Grogu. Of course, this is only applicable for DX21. But what's interesting is the base that's featured up here, the figure stand, is the standard DX20 version, not the one that comes with Ahsoka. There's a little bit of assembly required here. Obviously, you don't need instructions for that, but if they're going to do instructions for this, I find it kind of funny that they decided not to do instructions for the DX21 base. I don't know, just an interesting quirk that I noticed in these. All right, let's start off by talking about Grogu. Now, this version of Ahsoka, of course, comes with Grogu as an extra accessory. There's some other changes, some other differences with this version of Ahsoka beyond Grogu. So, of course, when you look at the price difference, I believe there's a $30 price difference between the DX20 and DX21. But in my opinion, this figure by itself is definitely worthy of being a $30 price tag. With that said, if you have a lot of other versions of Grogu in your collection, then it may not be worth it just for this guy alone. So I'll let you know exactly what accessories also come with this set specifically. But yeah, this is a nice Grogu if you don't have one already. It's actually the exact same one for the most part as the one that came out with the DX Luke, also from Mandalorian Season 2. Now, I will say on mine, the paintwork on the Luke version is a little bit lighter. It's very hard to tell unless you have them right up next to each other, and I don't know if the camera's really going to show that off. And I don't know, that could just be something weird with this one. Maybe that's not how they all are, but for my particular samples here, that's what the differences are. I also have the Mandalorian version of the first season Mandalorian version of Grogu. I don't have that with me right now, but when I do a review of DX Luke, I'll pull all three of these out and we'll take a look and see if there's any further differences there. I know that one doesn't have articulated arms. This one does. You can see there, they rotate forward just like so. He also has rotation at the wrists and a ball joint at the head, which for Grogu, I think is just about all the articulation he needs. He does also have some swap out hands. These are meant to be more of little force push hands. He does come with two of them, one for each side. And to swap them out, you just pull out his arm like a typical swap out piece. And we will plug this one in here. And now he can do a force push if you want him to do that. But other than that, I mean, the paintwork on these things, even though they're small figures and even though it is just basically an accessory, the paintwork here is immaculate. The skin tones of the green, very well done. You can see that the cheeks sort of around the eyelids here, the ears all have this nice pink gradient to them. The detailing here, you can see under there, little teeth. I don't know if it'll come across on camera again, but the eyes have full sort of different levels of, corneas, pupils, whatever. They're all layered in there. And in real life, it really brings a new dimension to, a new animation to those eyes. And yeah, that's it for Grogu. All right, and here we have Ahsoka back on the pedestal. Now, of course, this is with all of her accessories removed. We'll take a look at them soon and add them back onto the figure as we move along. But I want to start off by going up here to the head sculpt and what a head sculpt it is. Now, you're seeing the back of it here. And of course, in the Mandalorian, this is a different version of Ahsoka compared to the Clone Wars Hot Toys figure. And I do have that for comparison. We'll take a look at that in a bit. But this is a much more realistic take on Ahsoka. And so compared to that Clone Wars version, the Leku here are much more toned down in their color. They're more aged, they're more wrinkled to have that more realistic look to them. Now, one thing that was a bit divisive about the look of Ahsoka in this show was that the Leku were significantly shorter than they were in the Clone Wars. And again, you're gonna see that when we bring out the other Ahsoka figure for comparison. And in the Ahsoka show that just came out, the Leku are longer. I want to say they fall maybe down to here in the show. They've definitely lengthened them a bit. I think they've made them a little bit wider as well. I don't know if the back has really changed too much, but time will tell if Hot Toys gives us a new version of Ahsoka with the new Leku. I'm hoping that they do it with light up lightsabers as well. I will certainly buy that. Ahsoka is the one character in the collection where I make an exception to my rule of not having more than one version of a particular character. Now, moving down a bit here, we can see that she does have some seamless arms. Now, these are a new type of material, and this has been seen in only a few figures so far. The new Wonder Woman WB100 figure has it, and presumably any figure that comes out from this point forward that has seamless joints is going to use this new material. It's more of a silicone material compared to what was used previously, which was sort of a rubbery material. And you're going to see maybe a bit of that difference when I pull out the Clone Wars Ahsoka, but the difference is very noticeable in real life. It has a very different feel to it. It's softer. It's actually much more realistic feeling, but also it should still maintain a bit more durability compared to the previous rubberized joints. Now, obviously, as with many things in Hot Toys, you don't want to leave it in a single position for too long or put it into too extreme of a pose because there is a risk that that is going to tear or break, but I do believe that it's going to be more resilient here. Now I'm going to move down here to the midsection of her outfit where she's got this belt here, and this is some of my favorite details in the piece. You can see there's some really nice leather and sort of wrapping here at the back. It's tied up, and there's a lot of multimedia going on. This is all separate pieces, really, from what I can tell. You do have these little beads here, and they are basically all plastic, which is good. because it's not going to fray or get damaged really. And then moving down lower to her sort of pants here. I don't know what type of pants these are, but I really do love the texturing going on in all of this, and the pattern there really just adds a lot of visual interest to the figure. And again, we're going to compare this to the Clone Wars version of Ahsoka, and in Clone Wars it's meant to look more like the animated show, and so the details are a lot simpler and flatter, and certainly not as intricate as what we've got going on here. I'm going to pick the camera back up for a second to take a look at her arms. You can see she's got some really nice arm wraps here. Thankfully, they are properly done to where they are cutouts showing the skin underneath. There is an upcoming Sideshow Clone Wars Ahsoka figure based on more of one of her Padawan looks, and they did the same thing with her legs, but they just pasted on orange diamonds onto her pants instead of actually having them be cutouts. And so, not a big fan of that, but we'll see. I'm probably going to get that figure as well to review, so we'll see if it's really that bad in real life. And here you have her gauntlets and her hands. Again, really nicely detailed, as you would expect. And then finally moving down to her feet, very similar textures and paintwork as those gauntlets. I really like the blue. It really kind of adds a nice pop of color down here. The shoes have a really fun texture underneath. And of course that bright yellow really pops, and it's popping more because she's on a mirrored rotation stand here. So yeah, there we go. That's a quick look at all of the details on the figure. Now, as far as posability goes, we're going to start up here at the head, and I'm going to pop the head off because one of the aspects to posability that I consider to be posability is eyes. And this is something that Hot Toys has been doing in a lot of their figures now. They've been adding in movable eyes. And to do that, I find it easiest to first pop the head off as I did here, and then you simply remove the front faceplate from the Leku here. Now, as I said, you could do this with it on the figure. I prefer to pull it off of the figure because I find it difficult to put the head assembly back together. But you could, of course, take this, pop it back into the ball joint here, adjust the eyes so that it matches the pose that you've set, and then pop the head off, put it on, put it back on, whatever order you want to do. But to change the look of the eyes, you can see back here, you've got these standard ball joints there, and then you use this included tool to sort of get in there and rotate these how you want. I'm not going to mess with them right now because I've got them looking straight, and for the pose I'm going to put her in next, that's where I want them to be. But obviously you can mess around with that as you wish. And then this, to put it back on, you want to put it on kind of directly how it needs to go. I find it easiest if you come down here. You can see there's sort of a little section there that it's going to slide into, and just make sure that it goes in. If you try to put this on while it's on the figure, this up here tends to have kind of a gap that I can't fix. So there you go. And while I have the head here, I will point out the Leku themselves do have wiring in them, so you can pose them. I don't know how much I would necessarily force that, but if there's a pose you're trying to get her in and they just absolutely won't go the way you want them to go, you can pose them. And I believe you can actually move this one as well. Yeah, you can. And you can actually see the sort of holes here. I guess they're like stress relief holes, showing that all three of these sections here do have that posable wiring beneath them. So we'll take the head, we'll pop this back on here onto her neck. And you can actually see while I have this off that this is also that softer silicone material. All right, with the head back on, let's take a look at the rest of the articulation here. Now, of course, it's on a ball joint, so the head can rotate side to side. Again, you will want to move those around depending on which pose, how far you're trying to force the head. Under here, she does have another joint in the neck, but there's a lot of layers of clothing there, so she can look down. But again, you're going to need to adjust everything in order to make her do that the way that you want. And same thing with backwards. It'll work, but you've got to adjust those tendrils there. Now her shoulders, as I said, are the new silicone seamless joints, so you can raise these up like so. I don't know how far you want to force that, but I would say that's probably the limit of how far I would go. They do rotate forward here, say about that far, and then back about that far. And I will say, compared to other figures I have with seamless joints where they use the older style of rubber, these do not sort of bunch up like the rubber does. They really don't. They tend to act more, I would say, like what actual skin does. You get a little bit up here, but it really, I think, looks really good. And I'm super happy that Hot Toys is doing this going forward, because there are some figures that you really, I don't like how they look with joints. I would prefer to have the seamless joints, but I'd really like to be able to use those seamless joints without fearing the use of them. So this is a big step up in my opinion. Now moving down her arm here, a lot of people have had issues with the elbows on this figure. And if you have this particular figure, maybe you haven't even dared to bend the elbows yet because you've seen the horror stories of people online who have had them breaking and everything. My suggestion is this: pop off the hand, which I'm gonna try and do here. I'm sitting pretty far back from the figure because I'm behind the camera, so it's a little tough, but pull off the gauntlet and then pull off this arm wrap here. Now you can see what's going on underneath the arm. It does cut off at the elbow joint, and this is just a standard plastic piece here. So unlike the Clone Wars Ahsoka, you can bend these elbows without worrying about ruining the seamless joint. However, I would say to take off those pieces first. Number one, so that you can see how the arm bends, which way it's rotated. And if you try to bend it here and you're noticing a lot of resistance, you might want to warm it up with a heat gun on low, a hair dryer, maybe even just some hot water, but doing something to make this a little bit easier to bend. So this is about how far you can get the elbow to bend with the wrap on. You can see it does bunch up here a little bit, so just be careful of that. It is a single joint. It's not a double jointed elbow here. I would have preferred to see a double jointed elbow, just so if you wanted to bend it more than this, you could. This is pretty limiting to only have basically a 90-degree bend there. I get that you might not have really been able to get much more movement out of this just because of that wrap going all the way up her arm. But, the option would have been nice, of course, to have that included. Now coming to the mid-torso here, she does have some rotation here, and it's actually fairly easy to use. It's not restricted. This entire clothing here kind of fits down underneath this belt, so you can see it does move fairly easily and without too much trouble. Moving down here to the legs, you've got a forward leg joint there, backwards about there, and outwards here. And of course with leg joints, I always try to show sort of the split stance, because you obviously, people show, well, you can kick the leg out this far. Well, yes, but you can't kick both out that far. You can only go about this far out with both legs, because this is where the seam of the pants actually falls. But overall, this is very loose material here. Really no risk of damaging the figure by having the hips posed there. Legs bend there. Seems like they're basically a single joint, because again, you get about of a 90-degree there, but no damage to really worry about. There is some rotation to the leg as well. And then the feet are separate, thankfully, from the rest of the leg there. They can rotate side to side. They're on a typical kind of swivel joint, so you can move them a little bit, get a bit of a tilt out of them. Forward and back is pretty limited just because of this piece here. This doesn't really slide up very much to allow more clearance for this. So, again, as with most figures, it's going to take a bit of finagling to get it the way you want it to go. But I think overall this is a figure that you're going to be able to pose with without too much worry about damaging the figure. You can pose it into a lot of nice poses that aren't museum poses and keep them in that pretty long term, I would say. Now starting off with her accessories, we of course have her lightsabers, and you can see I've got them mounted here. Just like your typical lightsaber, they have a little metal ring on them that can hook onto the figure. So let me take these off and we'll take a look at these in better detail. Now this is the second Ahsoka figure that we've gotten in Hot Toys fashion. The first one of course was Clone Wars, which means that she had her Clone Wars era lightsabers. Now this is a Rebels era Ahsoka, which means we get these versions of the lightsabers for the first time with the little diamond patterns. They've got the nice curve, and yeah, they look really good. I do have one little mark here. I don't know if that's a defect or what's going on there, but you can see that. It doesn't bother me too much. It just looks like a little extra wear and tear, of course, but it is there nonetheless. Now each of these sabers does have, as you can see, a little cap at the end, and with that cap you just pull this off. You gotta get a nail under there to pull it out. You can pull that little cap out. It's just put in there with a simple little post, And that allows you then to plug in the lightsaber blades. And she does get 2 of them. She's got a longer blade as well as a shorter blade, of course. And all you have to do, oops, that's the wrong hilt. Plug that in just like so. And there you have the lightsaber ignited. Now, I do hope that in the future we get a new version of Ahsoka from her own show where they give us some USB style lightsabers, so we have some actual light up lightsabers. But I'm glad that for this first take on the character that we're getting just a basic set of these sabers, you know, no fancy LEDs or anything in them, just a nice looking 6-scale saber. Now, like other figures, of course, she also does include some blades in motion, so you can plug this in and it sort of looks like the blade is being swiped down. She does, of course, include also a smaller version for the Shoto hilt. One other really tiny detail I want to mention about these hilts, in case you get this figure and you don't notice this difference when you first take them off, the little caps at the ends are actually different. The one that has the little tiny notches, little, like, or maybe those are little holes or something there, I don't know. But the ones that have that kind of going around it belong to the shorter hilt, whereas the one that has just a few rings around it belongs to the longer hilt. Hands are one of the most basic accessories that any Hot Toys figure is usually guaranteed to include, and Ahsoka is no exception. She does have some open palm hands here. You can see I've got them featured. She's got a left and a right. We also do have some semi-grip hands here. Again, left and a right side, and these are, of course, meant to hold onto a lightsaber hilt. So if I just slide that in just like so, you can see she holds it very easily. No big issues there. And then she comes with a fist for the left-hand side. I'm going to be honest, this is a little bit disappointing. I think she should have included more hands. This is a DX figure. Typically, DX in the past was known for being pretty heavy on accessories. I think that distinction has kind of gone away now, but there's a lot of other hands that they could have included here. I mean, at least give us a left fist. You gave us a right fist. Where's the left one? All right, now we start to move into the exclusive accessories that you can only get by getting the DX21. And the first is this lantern. Now, as you can see, there is some really nice paint detailing on especially the gold sections here. I do really like that. There's some nice paint splattering. It looks super in-universe. I mean, this is very Star Wars-y, in my opinion. That blue is nice. It's a fairly decently sized accessory, too. If I bring Grogu back in here, it actually, yeah, there you go. It's actually taller than Grogu. But I don't like the yellow. It's just a solid yellow piece of plastic. And when you look at photos of this online, oh, and this is actually messed up down here. Look at that. That's not in the hole right there. I'm just now noticing that for the first time. Not necessarily a big deal. I think I can fix that fairly easily, but just something to note there that I have that little defect. Anyway, on the pictures online, the kind of official blogger photos or whatever, this always has a glow to it. And when, they're holding it nearby in the photos, they're kind of a darker photo. It's taken in that foresty area. This is, constantly illuminating the clothing. And I think it's kind of a shame that this doesn't have an actual LED feature in it. I mean, it's kind of the perfect shape for it. I think they could have done it. And it's just maybe a little lacking for me to not have that included. All right, just a quick update. I did go and fix that spot after I saw it because it's driving me nuts. So it looks better now. Maybe a little bit, you can kind of tell which one it is. It looks a little bit wonky still, but it's fine. It's Star Wars. Everything's kind of worn down and isn't perfect anyway. All right, next we have the display base, which is here. This is actually 2 pieces. This tree here is a separate piece. It actually, you can still pop it out if you wanted to. It's just plugged in there very simply. But yeah, unlike the display base that you saw earlier in the instructions, this is much more interesting. It features some nice wood, some rocks, tree, dirt, all nicely painted up. It looks good from pretty much all sides. I don't know if there's a true front or back to this base. I want to say this is the way, and you put the figure here, and I just said this is the way. I totally did not mean to say that in the context of a Star Wars review, but I did. And this is kind of how I'd expect the figure to be. But it does have a flight stand here. which typically you put at the back of the stand. So I guess you're supposed to put it this way if you have the figure on the stand. I don't know, but something very interesting about this here is typically when you have a flight stand, and you know, here's the kind of waist grabber that it comes with, very standard stuff for Hot Toys, but typically you get the articulated pole, but instead this is it's a solid metal pole. It has no articulation to it. I don't understand why they did that. I haven't seen this before. Let me know in the comments below if any other figure has this just solid piece, but typically when it comes to pieces that use this with the clamp that slips on over top of it, typically it's the articulated version. And I don't understand why. She's not a particularly heavy figure, at least not any heavier than other characters that have come with the articulated stands. I will mention she is definitely hefty, like significantly more than other female characters. Like compared to the Clone Wars Ahsoka, she feels like she almost weighs twice the weight. I don't think she actually does, but I believe it's due to that new silicone body. It really weighs a lot. I've heard people saying that the new Wonder Woman feels like an Iron Man figure just because she's covered on arms and legs. So interesting stuff. It makes her feel higher quality to me, but still definitely not heavy enough to where the articulated stand couldn't have been included. I think it would have helped with the posability of this figure a lot if we had gotten that. And take a look at here is this little cloak accessory. Similar to the Clone Wars version of Ahsoka, she also came with a little cloak that went over top, but this one is a little bit more detailed. There's a more sort of intense pattern to the fabric. You can see kind of different weaves and textures in there. You get some little patchy pieces. It kind of looks like something she's constantly worn and repaired over time, and obviously it's very tattered. There's different pieces and sections that fall down. It's not perfect. Much more fitting of a the live action version of Ahsoka, whereas the piece that came with the Clone Wars Ahsoka, of course, is meant to represent more of that clean animated look. Now to mount this to the figure, the first thing we want to do, take Ahsoka, and yes, you guessed it, pop off her head, and then we're going to take this, just wrap it over her shoulders here, and then there's a simple snap right here. So just line that up, and then we're gonna bring this over and snapped it into place like so. And then just get that kind of out of the way, take her head, bring it down on top, and snap it into place like that. And there you have Ahsoka with her cloak on. I really love how this looks. It adds a lot more visual interest, a lot more depth, and of course just really is a look that I associate with Ahsoka because she's worn this so much. And this to me kind of brings her back to that Clone Wars look a little bit more, in my opinion. It's just something that I really see her having. Now, she of course has a hood there at the back, which you can pull up sort of like so. It's not perfect. Let me show this off as best I can. It doesn't really, you've got to finagle it a lot to really try to get it up more. I think it should come down over her face a little bit more. And it's a matter of trying to get it up and out from underneath this rear piece back here. And maybe angling that up a bit to force this forward a bit more. And you can see there, I even got a little bit more movement out of it. But trying to get it to sit flat, anyone who's messed with wired hoods in Star Wars knows that this isn't something that I can do while trying to do this in front of the camera. But, you can mess around with it and get it looking fairly decent. But for me, I think the display that I'm going to go with for now is going to be having that down just like so. And one final thing that this figure does include is a little backdrop here. You can see it's a forest scene. Interestingly, this is different from DX20. DX20, the backdrop is based on sort of the outpost scene. I think it's when she's fighting at the start of that episode, the enemy faction she's going after. It's based off that scene, whereas this one, of course, is based on her encounter with Grogu, of course, to match up with the display base we just took a look at. So yeah, pretty cool. I mean, it's heavy duty cardboard, very similar to other releases that they've done with backdrops like this. They're a little bit heavier duty than like the one that came with Wasp, for example, from Ant-Man and the Wasp. That's one that I have. Deadpool has one where he's got like a little shelving unit. These are heavier duty. The one that came with Luke is much more intense than this one because it's the whole doorway, so it has another 2 sections coming out of it. But This is pretty simple. It's nice. I doubt this takes up much of the budget. It's just, you know, again, a little nice thing to have if you want to add a little extra to the backdrop of your figure. There you go. All right, anyway, we have a quick comparison between the two Ahsoka Hot Toys figures. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time comparing the differences between these guys because, look, they're very different characters. They're meant to represent very different things. You have a live-action adaptation of the character versus Hot Toys attempting to bring an animation model into figure form. So, with a bit of a live-action flair, before the live-action Ahsoka was actually revealed in the show, in The Mandalorian, mind you. So very different things, very different styles. There are some similarities to them. For example, they both do have bendable leku to kind of mess with the articulation, but obviously on the Clone Wars one, they are much longer. So you can get a little bit more motion and kind of posability and expression, I should say, out of those. There are some similar aspects to them in terms of their kind of outfits, how they've got the gauntlets and the sort of lower leg designs, very similar there, but obviously, again, much more detail on the Mandalorian version of the character. I'm just going to zoom up here a little bit so you can see these at closer distance. Now, the one thing I want to call out here, and the main reason I wanted to show off this combination, is the difference in the seamless arms. Now, with the Clone Wars version, you can see the seamless arms mainly affect her elbows. The shoulders are actually not part of the seamless body. You can move the shoulders without an issue. Whereas on the Mandalorian version, it is down to the shoulders where the posability is for the seamless part. But that's not the big difference I want to talk about. The big difference is the material. And I mentioned this earlier that the new Ahsoka uses the more of a silicone material, whereas the Clone Wars version used the older style rubber seamless joints. And I don't know if it's coming off on camera here, but there is a visual difference between the two. The rubber style used on the Clone Wars one tends to pick up light more, it's shinier. Whereas, as I said, the silicone style feels more realistic. It feels more like actual skin, and it picks up light more realistically as well. And as I said, too, it also tends to, from what I can see, it bends a little bit more realistically, too. It doesn't roll up as badly as the rubber does. So a big improvement there. I know I myself am really hoping that we see a younger version of Ahsoka appear in the Ahsoka show. Now that's probably wishful thinking, maybe a Mephisto situation there with those hopes. But I would love to see a flashback to the Clone Wars with a younger Ahsoka in live action, so that maybe Hot Toys can have another crack at that design and give us something different. That, you know, takes some aspects that are great from this figure and takes some aspects that are great from the Mandalorian version and combines them together. But, you know, again, that's just wishful thinking as of the time of this video here. So maybe that won't age well. I don't know. All right, so now for my closing remarks, and I have to say, I really, really love this figure. When I first got the Clone Wars Ahsoka, I thought that was going to be the definitive Ahsoka in my collection, and at first I debated if I should even bother getting the other versions of the character, because again, I didn't really like to break my rule of not having more than one version of a piece, but this, absolutely worth it. I'm so happy that I went for this. She's truly an impressive piece in hand, and I have to say, while I do really love the Clone Wars version, and she's a very different figure from this one, I think this might be my favorite and my preferred between the two. The detailing is outstanding. She does have some really great accessories. I do find myself wishing she had maybe a little bit more content in the accessories department, primarily, again, the hands. I feel like there could be more hands included here with her being a DX figure, and given she is a $315 set. But it's not a big deal for me. She doesn't feel incomplete. Now, judging this figure over the standard version, the DX20 version of the figure, I think that it is worth the extra $30. You do get some really nice display stand pieces included here. The lantern, the base, the little tree accessory, I think really helped to elevate any display that you have her in. It's just going to make her look more in world. It's going to make her look more like a statue, and it really complements the detail of the piece. If you don't have a Grogu yet, certainly this is, I think, a great opportunity for you to add one to your collection. This is, you know, a good version of Grogu. He's got the articulation And of course the swap out hands, I think that's pretty good as far as we can get for now. But if you do have a lot of other Grogus, then certainly I think the main deciding factor is, do you care enough about the base to get this version? Now, as of the time of this recording, the DX20 is currently waitlist full, whereas this character, the DX21, is waitlist open. And I waited, like I said, on this figure because I wasn't sure if I wanted to get her. I wasn't sure if I was going to wait and pick up maybe just a version of her from the Ahsoka show, but I decided to wait, and the waitlist happened, and I regretted it immediately. So when my waitlist converted, I did pick her up, and I'm very happy that I did. And let me tell you, any future version of Ahsoka that Hot Toys puts out, yeah, I'm going to get it. I'm absolutely going to get it. I don't care if it's very visually minor differences, with her Leku or whatever. Hopefully, like I said, we see some LED lightsabers or something, but I love the character too much, and I love her design too much, and Hot Toys is just absolutely nailing it with these pieces. So definitely something I want to get more of in the future if they put out more versions of her. So I hope that was a helpful review for you guys. If you're thinking about going on the waitlist or tracking this down in the aftermarket, I highly recommend it. But at this point, if you don't have any luck with the waitlist, then maybe wait and see. Wait and see what happens with the Ahsoka show. See if they put out a version of her from her own show and what that figure does differently from this one, maybe before you pay any obscene aftermarket prices on it. But trying to keep this video future-proofed. If they don't do another version of her from the show, I think you definitely need to track this one down. Until next time, thanks for watching.